Mark, we know that we always get that call. Somebody calls up, they've got a load cell. They feel that the load cell is defective, potentially defective. It's not working in their system, whether it be a scale or a process weigh machine or something to that effect. We try our best to help give them guidance over the phone. What are some of the things that we're looking for, maybe to at least get through that initial evaluation with a customer before we get the load cell back and we have to again send it back for repair?
Right. Well, I guess the first thing that I would have somebody check if the load cell is mounted on equipment, process weighing, that type of thing, make sure that there's no contact between what you're weighing, the basket bin, and the frame around it. So anything that could keep the load cell from freely deflecting, anything that would keep that deflection happening, which is your output from the load cell, will certainly make it appear as though the load cell is not functioning. So the load cell may be functioning,
right,
but just has an inability to deflect because something's in the way.
Okay. So more of a mechanical interference,
right,
than something else.
Exactly.
Okay.
So then moving on, if it appears as though something has happened to the load cell itself, let's get the load cell off and let's get it on the bench and let's do what they call a bench test. So let's fire it up with 10 volt regulated excitation, and it needs to be regulated because if it's unregulated, that output's going to vary with the ingoing excitation. So we've got excitation regulated that's powering the load cell, and we need to see what that zero balance is reading, either on a digital indicator or some type of millivolt type reading, basic digital indicator. So if you've got a good steady zero balance, then within 10% of its full scale range, then I would say, okay, we can start looking further. But that's a pretty good indication that the load cell is probably functioning. You can actually hold the end of the load cell where the cable comes out, apply a gentle load to the end, see if the numbers ramp up or down. But if you have a high zero balance, then we know that the load cell's been overloaded. It's been bent, it's yielded, and it's no longer returning to its at-rest position. So the strain gauges will pick up that permanent shift in the shape and display as though there's weight on the load cell, even if there's not. So that's the pretty number one indication if a load cell's been overloaded, is a high zero balance.
Got it. Okay. And if anything, if somebody takes the load cell out of the device, said whether it's a scale or when you're looking at a machine and they happen to look at the load cell and they notice that, okay, there is some permanent deformation in that load cell, we've already then gone beyond that point where that could be something that could be troubleshooted and they know exactly why that load cell isn't working.
Right. And if you have a load cell that's bent to the point that you can see it, that was a pretty significant event. And the first thing I would recommend is you got to go back and find out how that happened, because your load cell should never be in a compromised position where the amount of force that could be applied to it is going to exceed its range of 150% of its full scale output. So I did have an interesting application one time where the load cell was being used to weigh French fries, and it worked perfectly. And suddenly they said, okay, the load cell's not working anymore. And so I sent them another one, and the same thing happened. It lasted about 2 months during the testing process. And again, they called me and said, well, it's not working anymore. And I said, well, send me the load cell, because this is very unusual. So they sent me a load cell, and it was overloaded to the point where it was bent. You could see it.
Right.
And so I called and said, well, tell me the circumstance that the load cell failed. And they said, well, it's happening every time that the heating light over the French fry bin is burning out. And I said, okay, how does a person reach that heating lamp? Well, they stand on the basket, and well, there you go. So.
But a great story, and I assume that application was resolved at that point.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Don't stand on the load cell.
Right. Good. Again, another great discussion. Thanks a lot, Mark.
You got it. Thank you.